I remember the exact moment my world split in two, a simple evening light filtering through lace curtains, when Ava, my sister-in-law turned reluctant confidant, uttered words I never thought I'd hear. "Your husband and Ember, they've been meeting behind your back." My breath caught sharp as glass. Ember, my daughter-in-law, and Philip, the man I'd loved for 42 years, had betrayed me a week before the divorce papers were signed. I sat there, porcelain teacup, trembling in my hand, as Ava's confession fell around me like shards of ice. My heart thundered, not with grief, but with something colder, the steel of resolve. I felt the years of loyalty and love crystallize into clarity. I would let them believe I was blind, naive, broken, until the moment I chose to strike back. I smoothed my expensive tablecloth, set my teacup down with the calm precision of a woman who'd mastered every domestic ritual, and let them think they'd won. They didn't know I'd spent those same hours gathering evidence, consulting an attorney, reading the fine print of my grandfather's trust. They had no idea that behind my gentle smile and unknowing nod lay the heart of a strategist, a woman who knew exactly how to play the waiting game. Their arrogance would be their undoing, and when they finally realized the trap, it would be too late. Not for forgiveness, but for mercy. I had waited my whole life for this moment. Now I was ready. I still remember the way the afternoon light lay across my dining room table when Ava arrived, dappled soft, as though the sun itself were trying to soothe what I was about to learn. I'd prepared the good china heirloom plates edged in gold and iced cucumber tea in crystal tumblers. But as soon as Ava crossed the threshold, clutching her purse like a lifeline, I sensed the air had changed. She was pale, her usual flawless makeup streaked around the corners of her eyes, as though she'd been crying. "Margaret," she whispered, voice quivering. "Thank you for seeing me." I led her to the table, each step echoing my growing unease. Beneath the lace tablecloth, my knuckles whitened. "I made your favorite cucumber sandwiches," I said, forcing a bright smile. "And that lemon cake you love." The scent of fresh basil chimed through the room, but Ava didn't reach for even a single slice. Instead, she sat hands folded in her lap, staring down at the tea tray with that frightened, haunted look. "Ava," I said gently, pouring the tea. My spoon rattled against its crystal cup, doing nothing to settle my racing heart. "What's wrong?" She lifted her eyes green and wide with panic. I didn't know who else to tell." Her voice cracked. She set her purse on the table and fumbled inside, finally withdrawing a folded envelope. "I've been carrying this around for weeks." She slid the envelope toward me without meeting my gaze. "It's everything I've gathered." I couldn't keep it inside any longer. My hand hovered over the envelope. "Ava, you're scaring me." I tasted sweetness on my tongue, but my voice felt hollow. She took a shuddering breath, and I realized she was trembling so badly, her knees must be knocking. "It's Ember and Philip," she said, already sobbing. "They've been seeing each other for months." I froze. The spoon clattered into the cup as I gripped the table's edge. Ember, my once beloved daughter-in-law, the girl I'd welcomed into our family with open arms, and Philip, my husband of 42 years. The words looped in my mind, impossible and awful. "No," I whispered. "That can't be true." Ava's tears fell freely now, and she wiped them away with the sleeve of her cardigan. I saw them at the cafe downtown, the one by Philip's office. They were holding hands in a corner booth, their heads close together like lovers. And then I saw them kiss. I wanted to run away, but I knew I had to tell you. My vision blurred. I gripped the gold edge of my teacup until my knuckles ached. "You saw." She nodded, her voice small as a plea. I didn't want to believe it. But Ember was laughing like it was some inside joke. And Philip, he looked so happy. My heart just broke, Margaret. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of cucumber and lemon, trying to steady myself. 42 years of laughter, tears, midnight conversations, and Sunday dinners, all at risk of shattering in that moment. But my voice, when I found it, was steady. "Are you certain?" I asked, though I knew the answer. Ava reached forward, placing a trembling hand atop mine. "I even confronted Ember last Tuesday. I asked her if it was true. She just laughed and said it wasn't any of my business. She called me old and out of touch, said you deserved someone younger, someone better. And then she threatened. She threatened that once the divorce was official, she'd make sure you got nothing." I drew in a ragged breath. Ember's words, if true, revealed cold calculation. Divorce. I echoed, voice barely more than a breath. "Has Philip filed papers?" Ava shook her head, eyes glistening. "Not yet. They're waiting until next week after you sign what you think are final terms. They've been planning this for a long time, Margaret. I'm so sorry." My heart pounded in my ears. The lace curtains fluttered in a breeze I hadn't felt. I looked down at my wedding band, simple gold worn smooth by decades of love. Would he wear a new ring by next month? Would Ember plant herself in my family home, decorating rooms I'd chosen wallpaper for? I released Ava's hand and stood pacing to the window that framed our rose garden roses Philip and I had planted on our 10th anniversary. The sight, once comforting, now felt like a cruel mockery, petals blooming over rotten roots. "What will you do now?" Ava's voice quavered behind me. I turned, feeling something harden in my chest. "Nothing," I said, calm as dawn. Ava's head snapped up. "Nothing, Margaret. I'm going to pretend I know nothing." I cut in, folding my arms. "I will play the dutiful wife, the unsuspecting mother. I will smile and pour tea and let them believe they've got me figured out. Because, my dear, some battles are won by waiting." Her eyes widened, and I walked back to the table, lifting my teacup in a deliberate gesture. "You understand, Ava," I said, voice soft but steel-edged. "I intend to let them think they're winning, and when the time is right, I will show them just how badly they've underestimated me." Ava exhaled a shaky laugh, half relief, half dread. I can do that," she whispered. "I'll keep your secret." I smiled a small, cold arc of victory. "Thank you. Now, would you like a sandwich? I don't care to eat one myself." She managed a small nod, and I poured more tea. The afternoon light shone through the lace, painting us both in gold, two women, bound by a terrible secret, ready to turn the tables on betrayal. Every morning this week, I've woken before dawn to silence so complete I can hear my own heartbeat crackling like winter's thin ice. After pacing for a few minutes, I slip into the kitchen and begin my ritual, folding the linen napkins with surgical precision, polishing the silver until it gleams, arranging the crystal glasses just so. By the time the sun peeks over the rooftops, my table is a portrait of calm order, a spotless white cloth, his grandmother's china rimmed in gold, and a single rose in a slender vase at the center. At first, the ritual was an attempt to hold on to normalcy, to keep time from spinning off into chaos. But yesterday, while I laid out the cucumber sandwiches and lemon cake with Ava's warning echoing in my ears, I realized this was no longer about staying grounded. It was about plotting a counterstrike. My home, my sanctuary, would become my command center. When the phone rings at precisely 8, My hand stills on the stem of a water glass. It's Ember, her voice airy and bright. "Good morning, mother-in-law. I just wanted to check on you. How are you feeling today?" I let her chatter fill the kitchen, masking the tension coiled in my chest. "I'm splendid, Ember. Thank you for asking." My tone is light, deceptively so. I mention nothing of my husband's late nights or the affair I know he's conducting. I ask after her plans for the garden club's spring fundraiser, drawing her into trivialities so she'll never suspect how closely I'm watching. She prattles on about flowers and fundraising galas until I slip in. "Ember, dear, do you have that recipe you promised me? Your sage-roasted chicken sounded divine." She pauses, mid-sentence. "Oh, of course I'll email it right away." And just like that, she believes I'm ensnared in domestic delights, not legal documents and trust provisions. Once the call ends, I stack the china and pour myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey, his favorite. I bring the thermos out to my den, where a stack of files waits, trust documents, bank statements, and a thick packet labeled Counselor Harper Chen. I open the folder on my grandfather's trust. There it is in black and white, the clause that strips any spouse who commits adultery of inheritance rights. Ember and Philip don't know this exists. They think they'll walk away with half a dozen properties. In that moment, the shock I felt when Ava spoke vanishes, replaced by a fierce clarity. I pull out my laptop and draft an email to Harper. "Please verify these trust provisions and prepare for deposition. We'll need a notarized opinion by Monday." Then I set my tea aside and switch to my personal spreadsheet, marking each asset and its current legal status. The house costs, the investment accounts, the vacation properties, every line is a battlefield I intend to win. At noon, I slip into my powder blue suit, the one Philip always complimented. I apply a neutral shade of lipstick and brush out my hair. If he glimpses me in the hallway, I want him to see only the elegant wife he married decades ago, not the avenger who's quietly mobilizing resources. I meet his gaze at breakfast, a steady look over half a boiled egg and toast. He offers a distracted good morning. I respond with a cool smile. He takes it as complacency. Later, Ember calls again. "Crash at your place tonight," she teases. "I'd love to catch up, just us girls." I tilt my head. "That sounds lovely, Ember, but I have an early meeting tomorrow." She pouts audibly. "Another book club," I laugh. "Something like that." My voice is warm, but I'm thinking of the cold conference room where Ava's files will prove my case. By afternoon, I've arranged for a private investigator to pull Philip's office security footage. I've scheduled a meeting with the county clerk to trace ownership records. Every move is deliberate. No haste, no mistakes they can exploit. I've even instructed Ava to remain discreet, to feign ignorance of my plans if Ember asks. In this quiet, strategic cocoon, betrayal is nothing more than the catalyst that steeled my resolve. I walk back into the kitchen just as the late afternoon light slants across the table. The rose petals glow like embers. I smooth a stray crumb from the linen and stand back to admire my work. Soon this table will host the final act of their deception, the signing of papers they believe will cement their triumph. And when they click their pens with self-satisfied smiles, I'll reveal my hand and let the law do what my heart alone could not. Because a perfectly set table is more than decor, it's a stage. And I, Margaret Lawson, am no longer the unsuspecting wife. I'm the architect of my own vindication, calm before the storm. When I stepped into Harper Chen's downtown office, sunlight glinted off the polished mahogany floors, as though the building itself were determined to look like a sanctuary of order. I'd been pacing my living room for days, clinging to the comfort of my rituals, but this felt like the first truly purposeful step I'd taken in a week. Harper rose from behind her desk, offering a firm handshake. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-suited with dark eyes that opened and closed like camera shutters, taking in every detail. "Margaret Lawson," she said, voice smooth and confident. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." I closed the door behind me and lowered myself into the chair across from her. My briarwood purse lay at my feet, and in my hands I held a bulging manila envelope, multiple copies of our marriage certificate, real estate deeds, bank statements, and most importantly, the trust documents drafted by my grandfather nearly a century ago. Harper slid around the desk, poured a cup of coffee for me, and settled in. "Let's get right to it," she said, unbuckling the delicate strap on her leather briefcase. "You mentioned a trust with unusual provisions." I nodded and handed her the envelope. "My sister-in-law tipped me off about an affair, and my divorce wasn't supposed to close until next week. Ember and Philip think they've got me cornered, but I always suspected my grandfather's trust might protect me. I just never knew how until now." Harper opened the envelope and began to sift through the papers with methodical calm. I watched her eyes narrow as she unfolded the trust document, her pen tapping a rhythm on the desk. The coffee's aroma mingled with the faint scent of old parchment. I held my breath. Finally, she looked up. "Your grandfather was ahead of his time." She tapped a paragraph halfway down the page. "See this clause? In the event of marital dissolution precipitated by adultery, committed by the spouse of the trust beneficiary, the offending party forfeits all rights to trust-held assets. The beneficiary retains full ownership unencumbered." My chest tightened so suddenly I thought I might choke. "You're saying if I can prove he committed adultery, I keep everything?" Harper leaned back, folding her hands. "Not just if you can prove the trust. Language is clear and binding. You are the beneficiary. Philip, as the offending spouse, cannot claim a single dollar or a single square foot of property held by the trust. That includes the family home, the investment condos, even the art my grandfather donated with the proviso, it remain under your control." I closed my eyes and felt hope flare in my chest, like a match struck in the dark. 42 years of marriage and a lifetime of love and loyalty, all reduced to a single devastating clause. The injustice of Ember's betrayal suddenly looked like my greatest asset. Harper laid out the documents on her desk, grouping them by category: real estate investment accounts, personal property. "Here's the fallout scenario they're expecting," she said, pointing to a set of divorce settlement proposals Philip's attorney drafted. "Half the assets, alimony, even the condo downtown. They're voracious, Margaret." I traced my finger along the coarse edge of the paper. "They think they'll walk away with everything," I murmured. Harper nodded. "But you don't file the divorce until we've secured proof of adultery. Then we file a petition to enforce the trust clause. Philip and Ember will discover they've been played, and they won't see it coming." My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. "What kind of proof will we need?" I asked, trying to sound composed. Harper tapped her pen on the desk. "Eyewitness statements, photographs, even phone records. Anything that pins down dates and evidence of intimate contact. Once the judge sees the trust language and the supporting evidence, the settlement they drafted becomes invalid. We can then renegotiate or simply enforce the trust, so everything remains yours." I drew in a steadying breath. "I already have one witness," I said, thinking of Ava's trembling confession. "She saw them at the cafe, and she's willing to testify." Harper smiled, a small, sharp lift of the lips. "That's a start. We'll need her sworn affidavit, and then we'll subpoena any relevant bank or phone records. Uber receipts, credit card charges, anything that places them together outside of the normal marital context." My mind raced forward. Ava, in a witness room under oath. Ember's face draining of color in court. Philip's smug confidence collapsing as the judge reads the trust clause. I pictured the headlines, "Beloved Patriarch's Trust Foils Daughter-in-Law's Scheme." I felt the bleak edge of fear slip away. Harper reached into her briefcase for her tablet. "I'll draft the initial petition today. We'll serve them first thing tomorrow morning at their homes and at his office. Then once the divorce is paused, we'll set a hearing date for the trust enforcement." I nodded, feeling a fierce pride. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for making this clear and making me believe I have a chance." She handed me a draft retainer agreement. "This is about more than money," Harper said softly. "It's about justice, your justice. I've handled cases where life insurance clauses hinge on similar language, but this trust is uniquely protective of its beneficiary. You're well equipped to win." My hand trembled slightly as I signed. The pen glided across the paper, finalizing our partnership. In that moment, the weight of betrayal felt lighter, replaced by the buoyancy of purpose. Later, I walked out of Harper's office into the bustle of downtown traffic, carrying a manila folder that promised retribution. The air was crisp, tinged with the promise of spring, and I realized I was smiling. By the time I returned home, the gold-rimmed plates and crisp napkins were waiting. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at my bone-white table, the surrendered tranquility of waiting, replaced by the tension of imminent action. Ember would arrive for our pot roast dinner, confident that she'd already triumphed. But tomorrow morning, the legal battle would begin, and she would discover the full force of my resolve. Hope wasn't just a flicker anymore. It was a steady flame. And I, Margaret Lawson, was ready to guard it with every ounce of my strength. The aroma of slow-roasted beef, rich, savory, flecked with rosemary and garlic, wove through the dining room as I set the final platter on the table. I'd spent the afternoon simmering the pot roast for hours, stirring the pan juices into a velvety gravy and arranging tender carrots and potatoes around the edge. The china glowed under the chandelier light, soft ivory plates edged in gold crystal glasses, catching every flicker. I poured a glass of water for myself and glanced at the clock. 7 o'clock. Exactly on time. The doorbell rang, and I smoothed the front of my silk blouse, breathing deep. As I opened the door, Ember swept in first. Her designer dress immaculately pressed her blonde hair, styled into perfect waves. Philip followed a step behind, tie, loosened dark eyes darting past me to the table. "Good evening, Mother," Ember purred, draping her coat over the banister. Her smile was radiant, but something in the curve of her lips suggested it was rehearsed. "Ember Philip," I said warmly, stepping aside. "Welcome. Come in." I led them to the dining room where the candles were already trimmed and lit, just enough glow to soften the shadows, not enough to hide anything. They took their seats. Ember to my right, Philip directly across from me. I sat at the head, a position I rarely claimed, but one I embraced tonight. I poured Philip's red wine, filling the glass halfway, then poured Ember's. Ember raised her glass in a delicate toast. "To family," she said, voice sweet as honey. "To family," Philip echoed, though his gaze flicked toward my plate as if calculating my portions. I picked up my carving knife and fork. "I hope you're hungry," I said. "This roast has been in the works since this morning." I carved a thick slice and placed it on Ember's plate first. She smiled, her eyes flicking upward to meet mine. "Thank you," she murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Philip cleared his throat. "It smells incredible, Margaret." His compliment was warm, but he reached out to squeeze Ember's hand under the table. Ember's eyes softened in response, as though this were a normal gesture of affection between a married couple, rather than a signal they shared a hidden secret. I offered the platter to Philip next. "Would you like more?" I asked. He nodded, and I served him a generous helping of potatoes and carrots before turning back to Ember. She regarded me with practiced concern. "Mother," she said, voice gentle, "we've noticed you and Philip have been well distant lately." Her tone was that of a daughter-in-law worried for her parents. Ember reached for her water glass, pausing as if to choose her words carefully. "I know marriage takes work, and after so many years, sometimes the spark fades. It happens to the best of us." I placed my napkin in my lap, hiding a twitch of impatience I refused to let show. "Thank you for your concern," I said smoothly. "Philip and I have lived a long life together. Distance is natural." Ember's eyelids fluttered, feigning empathy. "Of course I understand," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." I nodded, keeping my smile steady. "That's very kind of you." I took a bite of roast tender perfectly seasoned and chewed deliberately, forcing the momentary rhythm to settle into the conversation. Ember leaned forward, her voice soft. "I was speaking with Ava the other day, your niece, and she mentioned you both had such wonderful plans for spring. The garden, the grandchildren." Her words hung between us, a reminder of the life they'd want to inherit once all this was over. Philip raised his wine glass then, as though to preempt her. "A toast," he said, tone brisk, "to new beginnings." He clinked his glass against Ember's, then against mine. I sipped the wine, swirling it in my mouth before swallowing. Silky, with a hint of oak. Perfectly ordinary. Ember cleared her throat. "I worry about Philip's workload," she continued. "He's been working so late long hours at the office. It must be stressful." "You must be worried." I lifted my eyebrows, pretending to consider. "I do worry," I admitted. "But I also trust him to know what he's doing." I launched into the story of his last client presentation, carefully weaving praise with just enough nostalgia for our shared history that they wouldn't smell my doubt. Philip smiled, but his eyes flicked to Ember's when I mentioned the potential end-of-quarter bonuses. Ember's cheeks colored. "Oh, how wonderful," she said, voice pitched higher than natural. "You deserve every reward for your hard work, dear." She reached across the table again, letting her fingertips brush his wrist. Ember turned back to me. "You two always were a team," she added. "I only wish I could find that kind of partnership." The words were so sugary they nearly stuck to the corners of my mouth. I pressed my lips together and set down my fork. "I'm sure you do," I said. "Marriage is its own journey." My tone was neutral, but the undercurrent was clear. I knew exactly what she meant. Ember's partnership with Philip was far more than ordinary marriage. Dinner wound down with polite chatter, Ember asking about my book club, Philip remarking on how sturdy the garden roses looked this morning. Each compliment was a thread in their net of deception, each polite question a diversion from the truth. When the plates were cleared, I poured hot tea into delicate cups, the same chamomile blend Philip always preferred. Ember inhaled the scent and murmured appreciation, while Philip glanced at his watch before settling back. I sat a moment too long watching their faces in the flicker of candlelight. Ember's lips were set in a practiced smile. Philip's laughter sounded hollow, his eyes darting as though anticipating a trap. Finally, I broke the silence. "It's been a lovely evening," I said, voice soft but firm. "Thank you both for coming." Ember dipped her head fingers, twisting her napkin. "Thank you, Margaret," she said. "I'll come by next week, just us girls for tea." Her invitation was laced with false warmth. "I'd love that," I replied, voice regulated to ice. Philip rose then, standing behind Ember. He placed a hand at the small of her back, a gesture I knew too well from their clandestine meetings. Ember leaned into him as they passed, and as they reached the threshold, Philip finally met my gaze. His eyes widened just an inch, surprise or perhaps dread. I offered a polite smile and a slight nod. That was all the acknowledgement he needed. As the door closed behind them, I set my teacup down and let the silence envelop me. Behind the facade of family dinner lurked a betrayal so deep it nearly cracked the foundation of my life. But I, Margaret Lawson, had waited patiently for this moment. Tomorrow their guilt would become evidence. Tonight I would savor the quiet before the storm. I arrived at Piton and Associates 15 minutes early and watched the marble lobby's broad windows tint from gray to gold as the morning sun climbed. My palms were cool, even as my mind raced through every possibility. Nothing I did from here on out would be spontaneous. Everything would be precise, just as I'd planned. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the assistant appeared and led me down a hushed corridor into a conference room dominated by a long mahogany table. Leather chairs ringed its edges like courtroom benches. At the head sat Richard Piton, my husband's attorney of choice, according to Philip. Silver hair perfectly combed back, dark suit, tailored to emphasize his breadth, and those little wire-rimmed glasses perched just so on his nose he looked every bit the picture of confidence. Philip sat to Piton's right tie, slightly askew hands folded on the table. He offered me a small, forced smile as I took the chair opposite. Ember and Wade sat at the far end, Ember's posture rigid, Wade's eyes dull with discomfort. Piton cleared his throat, flipping open a red leather binder. Mrs. Lawson, thank you for joining us today. We aim for an amicable settlement of your divorce. No need for protracted litigation. He tapped a thick stack of papers. Your husband has been extremely generous. We've included a proposed division of assets for your review. I nodded and steeled myself. Thank you, I said, voice steady. Piton slid the first document across the table. Here is your portion. He gestured toward the pages. You will receive the downtown condo you purchased together 15 years ago. Half of your joint savings account, currently $120,000, and a monthly alimony payment of $2,500. My breath caught. The condo was valued at $200,000. Half the savings hardly covered legal fees. Alimony was a fraction of my salary. Philip would keep the family home, the business, the vacation properties, everything else. He would preserve the lifestyle they'd schemed to share. Piton looked at each face in turn expression smug. We think this is more than fair given the length of your marriage and Philip's primary role as breadwinner. I folded my hands on the table. May I asked, indicating the papers. Piton nodded. I fingered the top sheet, scanning the language. Grantor and grantee agree to dissolution. Husband retains. My lips curved into a small, neutral smile as I flicked through the pages. Wade shifted uncomfortably, meeting my eyes. I nodded slightly to encourage him to remain calm. Ember's cheek twitched. She mouthed something I didn't catch, perhaps relief. I cleared my throat. It appears you've considered maintenance costs and management responsibilities. I said particularly for the family home. I pointed to the clause. Due to complications regarding original deed and trust documentation, the family home shall remain in Mr. Lawson's name pending resolution. Piton blinked, surprised. Yes, he stammered. There were some discrepancies in the trust documents. Rather than delay, we thought it prudent to keep the property under Mr. Lawson's name. I nodded. I see. And how long might resolution take? I asked, arching a brow. Piton's hand wavered as he tapped the binder. It could be months, possibly years. Generational trust provisions, deed verifications. It's quite complex. I leaned back, studying his reaction. He'd slipped that clause in, believing I'd balk. My internal smile grew colder. "Thank you for clarifying," I said softly. Philip cleared his throat. "Margaret, I just want you to have stability. The condo isn't far from this area, close enough to family. It gives you everything you need." He sounded chastened, almost pleading. I lifted my pen and tapped the table. Silence gathered like storm clouds. Ember's eyes flicked from her husband to me. Wade held his breath. I began to sign my hand, gliding openly across the paper on the top of the stack. "Where do I sign?" I asked Piton in a tone so calm it could have been suggestion rather than question. Piton's jaw snapped shut. He blinked twice, as if disbelieving my compliance. Right there he croaked, pointing to the bottom of the page. "And here, initial this section." I signed again, initialing beside the trust clause. Each stroke was an affirmation I was choosing to yield this lopsided settlement. Ember exhaled a relieved laugh. Philip straightened, leaning forward as though to congratulate himself. But I didn't rise. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. "I trust you will file these documents with the court," I asked, voice gentle. Piton cleared his throat, standing. "Yes, Mrs. Lawson. We'll submit them this afternoon. The divorce should be finalized in 60 days. I nodded slowly, deliberately, letting their assumption of victory settle around them like fine dust. "Excellent," I said, placing the pen back on the table. "I appreciate your efficiency." Wade exhaled relief, flooding his face. Ember leaned forward, eyes shining with triumph. "Thank you, Mother," she cooed. I rose, then smoothing the skirt of my dress. "I suppose I'll go pack my things," I said, voice neutral. "Thank you for your time." Piton and Philip both stood, offering half bows. Ember slipped from her seat, sweeping a curtsy that would have seemed gracious if not so rehearsed. Wade trailed behind her, his shoulders easing back as though unburdened. I walked to the door, pausing in the hallway, just long enough to catch Piton's eye. His expression shifted. Confusion, calculation, fear. I saw it all there and offered him a thin smile. "Goodbye," I said. As the door closed behind us, I let the silence stretch. And then quietly, I released the breath I'd held since morning. They'd taken the bait, believing me broken and desperate. In a week, our divorce would be paused. The trust clause would be invoked. They'd discover the game they thought they'd won was rigged against them from the start. Walking back through the marble lobby, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Their triumphant faces would soon freeze in horror. And when they did, I, Margaret Lawson, would be ready. I was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes, hands wrapped in leather gloves, snipping at stray shoots, when I heard the crunch of gravel. I glanced up to see Wade's car pull in with more force than its tires should have allowed. My heart pinched. I recognized that gait from years of childhood worry, the gait of a son desperate for answers. Wade stepped into the garden gate coat flung over one shoulder, eyes wide and unfocused. Behind him, Ava climbed out of her car purse, clutched in both hands, her face pale in the late afternoon sun. I set the pruning shears down on the garden bench and walked toward them, my apron snagging on a rose thorn. Mom Wade called, voice raw. He rushed forward and collapsed onto the front step, as though every ounce of strength had abandoned him. I knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" He looked up at me, eyes glistening. "It's Ember," he whispered. She did more than just have an affair." Ava hovered at the gate, eyes wide with guilt. "I thought you needed to know," she said softly. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. I hauled Wade to his feet and ushered him inside, Ava following close behind. In the living room, I gestured to the couch. "Tell me everything I said, voice steady." Wade sank into the cushions, head in his hands. Ava sat at the edge of the sofa, purse on her lap. He finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. "I knew something was off when she asked me to meet her at the bank," he began, voice trembling. "She said she had a surprise. I thought maybe she'd arranged something special for us." My pulse hammered. "The surprise," Wade swallowed. "She handed me these." He pulled a stack of papers from his jacket pocket and laid them on the coffee table. The top document was an insurance policy. Life insurance policy insured Margaret Elizabeth Lawson. Beneficiary Ember Lawrence. I recognized my own name typed in crisp letters at the top, and the name Ember, my daughter-in-law. Below it, the policy details coverage of $2 million beneficiary designation effective 6 months ago. 2 signatures, mine clearly forged, and Ember's pristine script. I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water, forged my signature, named herself beneficiary. They hadn't simply conspired to steal assets. Ember had plotted for my death. Wade's voice cracked. I couldn't believe it. He rifled through the papers and pulled out another set, a bundle of printed text messages. And then I found these. He slid the texts across the coffee table. One read, "It's almost time. She'll never suspect a thing." Another, "I have her pills. Timing will be perfect." Page after page, Ember and Philip discussing dates, pills, schedules, malice, cold enough to freeze blood. I sank into a chair, mind racing. "Your father?" I asked, voice tight. "His name's on some of the messages," Wade said. "He said she was helping with medication. He thought he was protecting you." Wade's eyes brimmed with sorrow. "He didn't realize she was planning to poison you." Ava curled her fingers into her lap. "I saw them switch the bottles in the medicine cabinet," she said, voice small. "I thought maybe it was nothing, but I realized too late." Wade's grief erupted in a sob that shuddered the room. I rose and wrapped him in my arms, holding him tight, even as my own tears sprang. "Oh, my son," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." He clung to me, voice muffled. "I don't know how to go on without feeling sick, Mom. I loved her." I stroked his hair. "I know, sweetheart. I know. But right now, we need to protect what matters. We need to bring this out into the light." Wade pulled back and wiped his eyes, resolve flickering between despair and determination. "We have to call the police," he said. I nodded firmly. "Yes, we'll call Detective Martinez. He'll know what to do." Ava stood, then purse in hand. "I'll drive you, Wade," she said gently. "I can't stay here anymore." Wade reached for her hand. "Please stay," he pleaded. "We'll need you." Ava hesitated, then sank back onto the couch. "I'll stay," she said, "until this is over." I moved to my desk and dialed Detective Martinez's number, voice calm, as I relayed the facts, the forged policy, the text messages, the illicit medicinal switch. He assured me he would dispatch an officer immediately and meet us at the station. As I hung up, Wade paced the floor. "I can't believe they turned on us like this," he murmured. I followed him, placing a hand on his arm. "They betrayed all of us," I said. "But they underestimated the strength of family, and they underestimated me." Ava rose and crossed to me. "What about Ember and Philip?" she asked quietly. I looked at the papers on the coffee table, the forged signature, the insurance policy, the damning texts. "They'll face the consequences," I said. "We'll hand this over to Detective Martinez, and he'll take it from there." There will be arrests. Ember and Philip had thought they were playing chess while I was blind. Now, every pawn they moved would be their checkmate. An hour later, we piled into Wade's car, me in the passenger seat, Ava in back, Wade at the wheel, and drove to the police station. The sky had slipped into early evening streetlights, flickering on like silent witnesses. My heart pounded, but fear had been replaced by the steel-cold clarity of purpose. At the station, Wade and I gave our statements, handing over the documents to Detective Martinez, who nodded gravely. "This is serious," he said. "Identity theft. Fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. We'll get a warrant." Wade and Ava huddled together while I spoke quietly with Martinez, ensuring every detail was recorded. When I emerged from the interview room, Wade leaned against the wall, looking hollow but resolute. He exhaled when he saw me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing me." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Always." As we walked out into the cool night, I felt a sense of unity stronger than any betrayal could break. Ember and Philip had nearly destroyed us, but in their darkest act, they had forged a bond between us and Ava, one built on truth, loyalty, and the unyielding defense of family. Back home, I slipped off my shoes on the front step and looked up at the oak tree I'd planted decades ago. Its bare branches reached toward the sky, resilient through every season. Tonight, I knew its blossoms would come again, just as we would. And Ember and Philip would learn that some roots run too deep to be severed by deceit. We had placed the seeds of their betrayal before the police, and soon justice would bloom. For now, I stood with my son and my niece, determined to protect what was ours. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in months hope. I was in the kitchen when the first moving van rolled up its engine, rumbling so low I felt the vibration through the floorboards. I glanced out the window just as Ember stepped down from the passenger seat, her stilettos clicking on the driveway stones. She was clutching a purse and an overnight bag, face painted with triumph, as though she already imagined herself master of this house. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and walked outside, Ava slipping out behind me. Wade followed at my side, shoulders squared. The cool afternoon air smelled of cut grass and impending confrontation. The movers, two big men in company polo shirts, stood by the back of the truck, waiting for instructions. Ember swept across the lawn toward the front steps, a vision of confidence. Philip followed, tie undone, briefcase in hand. He wore that look of half excitement, half nervousness that I'd come to recognize from his furtive glances these past weeks. Mother Ember sang, tossing her hair, "We've come to collect the rest of our things." Her tone was light as champagne, but it popped like a bullet. I stepped onto the porch and folded my arms. Ava placed herself to my left, Wade to my right, forming a living barrier. Ember's smirk faltered. "Margaret, don't be difficult," she said, voice cool. "We signed the papers. This house and everything in it is ours now." I tilted my chin. "I must have missed the part where you took the title under your own name," I said. My voice was calm, but my pulse thundered. "Unless you plan to break in and help yourselves." Ember's eyes flicked to the movers. "We have movers," she said, gesturing to the truck. "They'll handle the heavy lifting." One of the movers stepped forward, tool belt clinking. "Ma'am, we were instructed to unload these furniture pieces into the house." He cast a nervous glance at Wade and Ava. Wade crossed his arms. "Not today," he said, voice firm. "You won't unload anything here." The mover looked from Wade to me. I can't do that without instructions," he stammered. I nodded. "Then you'll have to wait." I turned back to Ember. "I'm sorry you didn't get the memo." Ember's brow creased. Memo. Ava stepped forward. Yes, Ember, she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. Mom knows everything. About the affair, the forged insurance policy, the texts. We've handed it all over to the police. Ember's face went ashen. What? Are you talking about? Her practiced composure cracked a flicker of panic in her eyes. Philip's jaw clenched. Margaret, he said, voice tight. This isn't necessary. We can work this out, I interrupted. No, Philip. We're not negotiating anything today. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Wade, call Detective Martinez. Wade nodded and dialed while Ember lurched forward. Philip, get her to stop, she hissed. Philip took a step toward me, hand raised, but then Ava gently touched his arm. He hesitated, seeing the resolve in my eyes, then dropped his hand. Hello, Wade said into the phone. Yes, Detective, it's Wade Lawson. We need you at our house. Now. There are movers here, and I think they're about to steal the furniture. He handed the phone to me. I spoke rapidly, giving our address. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I hung up and met Ember's gaze. They'll be here shortly. Until then, you do nothing. Ember's proud mask shattered. She looked at Philip, pleading. Philip, call them off. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the low hum of the moving van's engine. The first police cruiser rounded the corner, lights flashing. Ember's breath caught. I felt a cold surge of triumph. I'd waited for moments like this. 2 officers climbed out and approached us. Officer Ramirez, I gathered by his badge. Ma'am, he said, addressing me. What's going on? I stepped forward. Detective Martinez advised us to involve you, I said, voice steady. These movers are unloading our property without authorization. We have evidence of fraud and identity theft. Ember Lawrence and Philip Lawson are suspects. Ramirez glanced at the movers, then at Ember. Is that correct? He asked her. Ember's lips trembled. No, she managed. We have every right to these things. Wade handed Ramirez the documents, the forged insurance policy, the text messages, the divorce papers initialed under false pretenses. Ramirez's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. He handed the papers back. Hold on to these, he said. Then he turned to the movers. Sorry, gentlemen. This property is under dispute. You need to leave the premises immediately. Driver, back the truck up and depart. The movers exchanged frightened looks, collected their dolly and boxes, and shuffled back toward the street. Ember's face drained of color as the van rolled away, her victory vanish with its taillights. Philip stood motionless. Ember sank onto the steps, head in her hands, sobs catching in her throat. Wade and Ava exchanged a glance, relief and vindication shining in their eyes. I stepped to the side and lowered myself to sit beside Ember, an act of merciful control. Ember's shoulders shook. Mom, I didn't, she began, but her voice broke. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Ember, I said softly, you hurt us. You betrayed us. My voice was firm, but not cruel. You can't take back what you did. She looked up at me, tear-streaked and terrified. Please, she whispered. I'm sorry. I nodded toward the police officers talking to Philip on the lawn. They'll decide what comes next, I said. But here on this lawn today, your games are over. Ember bowed her head, sobs racking her frame. Philip wiped sweat from his brow, guilt painted across his features. Wade sat on Ember's other side, arms around her comforting, even as his eyes brimmed with anger. Ava stood silently at my side, offering her presence as solidarity. The front lawn showdown cracked open all their pretenses, exposing the raw truth, and in that moment, surrounded by police family and the quiet strength of our united front, I felt the house settle around me safe once more. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the scene in gold. Ember cried quietly. Philip spoke in hushed tones with Ramirez and Wade, and Ava comforted me. I closed my eyes and inhaled the early evening air, knowing that justice, like sunlight, can't be held back forever. The kitchen filled with the scent of sage and roasting turkey, long before our guests arrived, warm, earthy, promising comfort. I'd spent the morning whipping potatoes into fluffy clouds of whipped cream and butter, stirring ribbons of caramelized onions into the stuffing, and arranging platters of green beans almondine. The china was my grandmother's. Each plate a little history lesson, each crystal glass a testament to years of family gatherings. But this year, the china carried new weight proof that our table could survive the worst kind of betrayal. Wade carved the turkey as Ava refilled wine glasses. Detective Martinez slipped in behind them, peppered gray hair in perfect order, his uniform crisp. Behind him came Harper Chen, her briefcase tucked under one arm, and our neighbors, the Hendersons, Bob and Elaine, whom I'd invited for their warmth and steadiness. The laughter of my chosen family echoed off the walls, a gentle reassurance that good people still thrived here. Martinez lingered at the threshold, nodding once. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I have news." I wiped my hands on my apron and crossed to him, heart thudding with anticipation. "Yes," he unfolded a manila folder. "Ember Lawrence has been formally charged with insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The district attorney's office is also moving forward with charges related to the forged policy naming her beneficiary. As for the allegations of attempted poisoning," he paused, locking eyes with Ava. "We're pursuing that as a possible case of poisoning. You may want to brace yourself for an extended investigation." My breath caught, and then slowly I exhaled. The weight of months collapsed into a single moment of clarity. Ember, who had sat at this table pretending to be worried about my happiness, would now face the consequences of her scheme. "Thank you, Detective," I said, voice steady. "Thank you for bringing this to light." Martinez nodded, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Happy to help." He stepped back, allowing the holiday scene to resume. The Hendersons offered their condolences in hushed tones. Harper slipped into a chair at the head of the table, her presence a reminder of how thoroughly I'd planned this reckoning. Wade cleared his throat, a signal that the time for speech had come. He looked around, catching each face, Ava's tearful but proud smile, Elaine's kind eyes, Bob's supportive nod, Harper's professional composure, Martinez's silent approval. Then he lifted his wine glass. To my mother he began, voice thick with emotion, who taught me that strength comes not from avoiding hardship, but from facing it with grace. "Thank you for showing us the path forward." I felt tears prick at the edges of my vision. I raised my glass, voice soft but clear. "To genuine bonds," I said, looking at Ava first. "To the niece who spoke truth when silence would have been easier." I turned to Harper. "To the attorney who helped me find hope in the fine print." Then to Martinez. "To the detective who cares about justice more than convenience." Finally, to the Hendersons. And to friends who remind us that family is as much chosen as born. Glasses chimed a warm, resonant promise that we were no longer alone in this. Laughter bubbled up, not the careless laughter of before, but true, honest laughter, a sound we'd earned. Dinner unfolded like a healing ritual. We passed bowls of cranberry relish around the table, its tart sweetness slicing through grief. Ava and I shared stories of childhood Thanksgivings, her memories of sneaking pecan pie crust, my recollection of my mother's famous sweet potato casserole. Harper and Martinez exchanged curious glances, slipping effortlessly into conversation about local community theater. The Hendersons recounted weekend trips to the coast, offering invitations that felt like lifelines. Wade carved another slice of turkey, each cut precise, respectful. No drama here, only care. He passed it to Ava, who smiled gratefully. Side dishes circulated, and I realized that for the first time in months, every person here was safe in their place. No hidden agendas, no whispered schemes. Toward the end of the meal, as pumpkin pie was served with dollops of whipped cream, I felt a profound sense of renewal. The table that Ember had sought to colonize with her deception was instead filled with unity. My heart swelled with gratitude. Gratitude not for the assets I'd protected or the revenge I'd orchestrated, but for the people who had stood by me. They reminded me that when you strip away illusions, you're left with the truth, and sometimes the truth is the most precious gift of all. Detective Martinez rose, clearing his throat softly. "Before you enjoy dessert," he said, "I want to give you my card. If you think of any more details or if circumstances change, please reach out immediately. We're committed to seeing this through." His tone was kindly, but firm. I stepped forward and took his card, pressing it into my palm. "Thank you," I said. "I know I will." He nodded and slipped back into his chair, content to watch the scene unfold. Elaine Henderson stood last, raising her glass in a spontaneous toast. "To second chances," she said. "To the courage it takes to rebuild stronger than before." Her words hung in the air, and each of us raised our glasses again, the crackle of ice and tintinnabulation of glass sealing the promise. The evening drew to a gentle close. We lingered over coffee and conversation, the candles guttering softly. I thought of Ember wherever she was cuffed and despairing, and felt a final layer of sorrow fall away. She had forced us to confront our worst fears, but she could not break the bonds that truly mattered. When my guests departed, Wade and Ava, hand in hand, Harper Chen, with her briefcase, quietly triumphant, Martinez offering a respectful wave, and the Hendersons promising to return for holiday cookies. I locked the door behind them and stood in the silence of my reclaimed home. I walked back to the dining room, where the china sparkled in the candlelight, and ran a fingertip along the edge of an empty plate. The table had been a theater of poison and betrayal. Tonight it had been the stage for truth and healing. I smiled soft and serene, knowing that when betrayal knocks, you can answer with two things: patience and purpose. And sometimes a plate of pot roast and the company of those who love you is all the vengeance or the justice you really need. The morning sun fell softly through the windows of the downtown condo, painting diamond patterns on the hardwood floors. The place still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet, remnants of the divorce settlement that had once felt like a consolation prize. I stood in the living room, arms crossed over my chest, and let the silence settle around me. No more ghosts of betrayal here. Today, this space would become something entirely new. The idea came to me late one night as I reviewed my Thanksgiving guest list. I thought of the women I'd met, friends and neighbors who'd faced heartbreak, loss, upheaval, and I realized how many lacked a safe place to land when life turned its back on them. Here lay the perfect solution, a refuge modest but dignified, where women starting over could stay while they rebuilt their lives. I called Harper Chen first thing. "I want to repurpose the condo," I told her, voice bright with possibility. "A temporary home for women in transition." Harper's laugh was warm. "Margaret, that's brilliant. Let's make sure the legal and insurance details are squared away, and then I'll help you find the right nonprofit partners." We spent the next week arranging everything, getting the condo insured as a short-term residence drafting house rules that emphasized respect and confidentiality, and coordinating with a local shelter network. Elaine Henderson volunteered to oversee housekeeping. Her cheerful efficiency had transformed my home's kitchen, and I knew she'd bring the same warmth here. Bob Henderson agreed to handle lawn care and minor repairs. Even Detective Martinez offered to post the program through the police department's community outreach, ensuring referrals reached women who truly needed a place to stay. By the end of that week, the condo looked less like an asset I'd surrendered and more like a sanctuary, cozy furniture in warm tones, a bookshelf stocked with novels and self-help guides, a small desk in the corner for job searches or letter writing, and a welcome basket of tea, coffee, and breakfast essentials on the dining table. I placed a framed sign on the entryway console. Welcome. This house is yours for as long as you need it. I stepped back and felt my chest expand with hope. That afternoon, I returned home to find Wade and Ava in the garden, kneeling in the rich soil and planting early bulbs around the azaleas. The frost was gone, and tiny shoots of green peeked through. Ava paused to wipe her brow and smiled at me. Spring wedding planning, she called. I sat on the garden bench and watched them work. I wanted to show you the condo, I said, meaning to share my new project. But the sight of Wade gently guiding Ava's hands as she placed a daffodil bulb warmed me more than any real estate venture could. But first, these two deserve a little peace. Wade stood brushing soil from his jeans and offered me his hand to help me up. Come see, he said, smiling. Ava followed, adjusting her gardening gloves. Together, we walked down the flagstone path toward the wrought iron gate that framed my grandmother's beloved rose garden. Standing there, I remembered my grandmother's laughter, how she'd twirled in her floral dresses among those blooms, and I felt her presence in the crisp air. This is where you'll say your vows, I said, gesturing to the open circle of benches she'd built for summer teas. White roses climbed the trellis overhead, their petals ready to unfurl. Ava's eyes gleamed. It's perfect, she breathed, just like I always imagined. Wade wrapped his arm around her waist and squeezed gently. We want simple, he said, voice low. Friends and family. A small band dinner out on the patio. I could see their vision coming to life, lanterns strung between the trees, a simple wooden arch draped in fresh greenery and mason jars of daisies lining the aisle. Let's sketch it out, I said, walking them back to the garden table. We spread out my grandmother's old gardening journal pages of flower layouts and plant lists and began to plan. Ava leaned over the pages, tracing a line of sweet peas in pencil. I love this chartreuse pop of color, she said. But can we mix in some lavender? It'll complement the roses. I nodded, recalling the lavender patch along the back fence. Absolutely. And the lavender's scent will drift through the air just so. Wade jotted notes on a pad. Music, he asked. I was thinking a small acoustic trio guitar, cello, maybe piano. I smiled at the thought of soft strings under the arbor. Lovely, I said. I know someone who plays cello. They'd be honored. We worked side by side, passing pencils and offering suggestions, the spring sun drifting lower as our plans took shape. We mapped out a dinner seating chart on the patio, discussed catering options. Ember's old favorite lemon thyme chicken ruled out in favor of something less reminiscent, and laughed together as we remembered family traditions. My grandmother's secret buttered bread rolls, Wade's childhood insistence on pumpkin pie before cake. At one point, Ava paused and looked up at me. Margaret, thank you, she said softly, for everything. You've given me and Wade a home, and now you're giving others a chance to rebuild. I rested my hand on hers. "It's my hope that healing multiplies," I said, "that when one door closes, another one opens." I thought of the women who would arrive at the condo this summer, widows, divorcees, survivors of heartbreak, each deserving of safety and kindness. They'll have a place to rest, to find strength, before taking the next step. Wade set the journal aside and looked at me with pride. "You've always been the heart of this family," he said. "Now you'll be the heart for many more." As twilight settled, we moved inside to pick out candles for the wedding tables, simple ivory pillars that would glow against the dusk. We carried them through the house, heads bowed in concentration, and I felt a quiet joy settle in my chest. Betrayal had burned away old certainties, but in its place had grown something sturdier, purpose, community, love that refused to be broken. Later, after Ava had chosen the ribbon color and Wade had tested the candle's flicker, I stood in the entryway watching them leave. "I love you both," I said, voice thick with emotion. They turned arms linked, smiles shining. "We love you too," Ava said. Wade winked. "Thank you for making our wedding possible and for making sure my mother has her victory too." I laughed, lifting my chin with playful pride. One victory at a time. As they walked down the path toward their own home, I closed the door and leaned back against it. The house was quiet, but no longer empty. The walls held plans for weddings and new beginnings. The floors would soon bear the footsteps of women finding refuge. The garden awaited the spring blooms we'd chosen together. I crossed to the living room where my grandmother's portrait gazed down with a knowing smile. I touched the frame and whispered, "We're making this place count, Grandma." Then I returned to the window, watching the last glow of daylight catch the budding roses, feeling that life, like every garden, can flourish anew when tended with care. I stepped out into the evening air, feeling the first cool breeze of spring tickle my cheeks. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the kind of sunset that beckons you outdoors, even when you've spent the day inside, tending to dinner platters and wedding plans. I walked past the garden gate and headed to the old oak tree at the far edge of the lawn, the one my grandmother and grandfather had planted on their wedding day 80 years ago. The tree's massive trunk stood firm against the fading light, its bare branches reaching skyward like silent sentinels. I placed a hand on its rough bark and closed my eyes, inhaling the scent of damp earth and budding green. Under this tree, 4 generations of Lawson women had found solace, strength, and hope. First, my grandmother Rose, who'd raised 5 children during the Great Depression in a modest kitchen not far from here. Then my mother Eleanor, who kept this house, standing during World War II, tending to domestic duties, while my father served overseas. When I was a girl, I'd climbed those very limbs, believing the world was infinite and kind. And now, here I stood as the 4th in line, having weathered my own storm of betrayal and rediscovered resilience I didn't know I possessed. I remembered how as a child I'd pressed my ear to this trunk, convinced I could hear my grandmother whispering advice through its rings. "Be patient," she might have said. Or, "True roots run deep." I had laughed then, but tonight I understood. My life had felt uprooted when Ember and Philip orchestrated their scheme. I'd questioned everything I knew about love, loyalty, and family. But standing here palm against the oak, I felt something immovable beneath my feet. It was not just wood and soil, it was legacy. I sank to the base of the tree and eased my back against the trunk. The soft moss cushioned me as I gazed up at the branches now studded with the first swelling buds of spring. I thought of the condo downtown, the refuge for women in transition, how I had turned what felt like a loss into a sanctuary. I thought of Wade and Ava planning their wedding under these very branches, finding new roots in a garden where old roots still nourished the soil. And I thought of the women who would come to the condo carrying their own burdens and grief and find a hand to hold a warm bed and a chance to rebuild. A gentle rustle overhead reminded me of life's cycles. Every winter stripped the branches bare, every spring clothed them in green. It was a pattern older than any of us, proof that even when everything looks dead, potential bubbles beneath the surface. I placed my hand on my belly, breathing in time with the breeze. This was my rebirth, the second act of a life I thought had run its course. My heart, once fractured by deceit, now beat with purpose. I was no longer the naive wife who saw betrayal as an end. I was the matriarch who knew how to transform pain into promise. Ava's laugh drifted across the lawn as she and Wade rehearsed a reading for their ceremony. Their voices were light, hopeful, precise, the antithesis of the whisperings that had once poisoned our family dinners. I smiled, remembering how Ava had risked everything to tell me the truth. Her courage had saved me, and I would forever be grateful. It struck me that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who stand by you when the world threatens to crumble. I closed my eyes and let memories wash over me. Learning to crochet lace napkins with my grandmother, dancing at my parents' anniversary parties, receiving my wedding ring from Philip's trembling hand. Each woman in my lineage had faced storms, economic collapse, war, grief, and emerged stronger. Now it was my turn to pass on that inheritance of endurance. I would tell my granddaughter the story of this oak tree someday, how it withstood decades of wind and drought, how it anchored our family. She would learn that her own roots were strong enough to hold her fast. A cricket chirped in the underbrush, and I opened my eyes to twilight's gentle descent. The first stars glittered overhead, faint but insistent. I stood then, brushing dirt from my skirt, feeling the oak's quiet presence at my back. Spring would come in earnest tomorrow, and with it weddings to plan and refugees to welcome. Life would continue, messy, beautiful, unpredictable. But I knew I would meet it with grace, guided by the lessons of the women who came before me. I paused at the garden gate, looking back at the tree one last time. Our roots, my grandmother's faith, my mother's resilience, my own determination, had fused into something unbreakable. The oak had taught me that strength is born of patience, that healing grows over time. My chest swelled with gratitude for the betrayals that led me here, for the kindness of chosen family, and for the promise that each new bud holds. As I stepped inside, I carried with me the oak's steadfast wisdom, that even in the darkest seasons, life will bloom again if you give it time and love. The late afternoon sun filtered through my lace curtains as my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen. Philip's name glowed insistently. I'd been expecting this call, my final move in a game he thought he'd already won. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on the tea towel, and answered. "Hello, Philip," I said, voice measured. On the other end, his breath came in ragged huffs. "Margaret," he gasped. "What have you done?" I eased into a chair, folding my hands in my lap. I simply invoked the trust clause. The adultery provision. Silence crackled like storm clouds. I could almost see him in his study tie, loosened forehead creased in panic. "The trust clause," he repeated. "You can't. There's no way. I signed those papers. Ember and I, we arranged everything. We thought." "You thought you were clever," I said softly. "You thought I was naive, that I'd sign away my rights without looking deeper." He made a strangled sound. But the documents, Paton's proposal, everything was in order. The divorce was set to finalize next week. "Yes," I said, tasting satisfaction as bitter as chamomile tea. But before any final decree, I filed the petition to enforce our grandfather's trust provisions. I paused, letting the words settle. Once the court reviewed the language clear and unambiguous about forfeiture for adultery, your claims to any trust, assets vanished. Philip's voice was strained. You tricked me. I didn't trick you, I corrected. I obeyed the law. I honored my grandfather's wishes. He understood that true betrayal required a safeguard, and he provided one. He made a despairing sound. So I lose the house, the investments, everything tied to the trust, everything I confirmed. The family home, the art collection, the vacation properties, they all remain under the trust and therefore in my control. His panic turned to anger. This is ridiculous. You can't do that to me. You're ruining my life. I settled back serene. I'm not the one who ruined a marriage for personal gain. You and Ember made that choice. You gambled on my ignorance and you lost. He inhaled sharply, voice softer edged with regret. Why are you doing this? Why not just let us live? I considered my words, because some things can't be ignored. Betrayal of trust deserves restitution. But I don't measure success by retribution alone. Philip's sarcasm cracked through. So this is about revenge? I smiled, a small, steady thing. No, Philip. This is about peace. True victory lies in reclaiming your dignity, not punishing your ex-spouse. I'm at peace because I acted justly. I won't spend my years seeking vengeance. I'll spend them rebuilding. A low groan came through the line. I thought I was doing right by you, giving you my life, my wealth. You chose someone else over me, over your vows, I said, voice gentle but firm. That was your choice. I choose serenity over bitterness. I choose family, my son, my niece, my community over endless bitterness. His words slowed softer now. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I replied. Just understand that the trust protections were always there. You simply neglected to read all the pages. His sigh was heavy, forced. I underestimated you, Margaret. I never underestimated myself, I said. I underestimated your integrity and Ember's greed. He paused, and I imagined him staring at the floor in shame. Is there any way to salvage something? I let a moment pass, then spoke with quiet compassion. You can start by acknowledging your wrongs publicly to family and peers. You can cooperate with restitution for Ember's crimes, and you can rebuild your relationship with Wade if he'll forgive you. His voice cracked. Wade, I don't know if he ever will. My son is stronger than you think, I said. He'll decide if forgiveness is possible. That is between you two. As for me, I have everything I need. A single tear glistened on my cheek. I'm letting go now, I said. It's time we both move forward. I wish you well, Philip. He drew in a breath. Goodbye, Margaret. Goodbye, Philip. I replaced the phone in its cradle and exhaled the tension uncoiling from my shoulders like a released spring. The kitchen was quiet once more, but not empty, filled with the promise of new beginnings. The trust had stood like an oak against the storm of betrayal roots deep in family honesty. Now its protection had brought my final checkmate. I rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the garden path where the wedding arch would soon bloom in spring's gentle light. True victory, I realized, is not in schadenfreude or revenge, but in the calm assurance that comes from living with integrity and grace. Tonight, I would sleep peacefully, knowing that peace itself is the greatest triumph of all.